Hi, thanks so much for stopping by. I'm really excited that you're ready to get started with baking with sourdough and you want to make your own sourdough starter from scratch. It's actually really easy. So I have this full written instructions and a printable recipe card on my website, and I'll have that linked below, but I'm just going to show you what to do here. So all you do is start by putting 2 cups of flour. Now the type of flour does actually matter some, but I'll talk about that in a second. We're going to start by putting 2 cups of flour into a mixing bowl, and you want it to be a fairly large mixing bowl so that you have plenty of room, because we're going to be adding some things over the next number of days. So let's talk about what type of flour you want to use when you are making a sourdough starter from scratch using just flour, water, and air. Pretty crazy. So the best flour to use when you're doing this is actually a whole grain rye flour. And the reason for that is if you use a whole grain flour, then those extra parts like the hull contain certain nutrients that really help a starter get going. And then rye especially is helpful when you're first creating a starter because of the nutrients that it contains that are just very beneficial for having a strong, robust starter. They tend to attract the yeasts from the air better and just give it a much better start than if you were just using like an all-purpose flour or something. So I recommend using a whole grain rye flour when you are starting your sourdough starter, starting to create it and bring it to life. So we have that in the bowl. The next thing that we're going to add is 2 cups of water. So you want this to be either filtered water or spring water. You don't want chlorine when you are creating a sourdough starter or taking care of a sourdough starter, because the chlorine will not be friendly to those nice yeasts and things that you're trying to get going. So we're just going to add that. By the way, if you're getting into sourdough, I really like this whisk. I think it's called a Danish whisk. All I know is it is very handy. It's just the right shape for really mixing sourdough and other types of like looser batters really nicely. I use this all the time. It's always what I use when I feed my sourdough starter, and then I'll also use it when I'm mixing up things like pancakes, waffles, stuff like that. So what we're going to do now is just mix everything together so that the flour and the water are completely incorporated. You just don't want to see any more dry spots of flour in there. And it should be like a soupy, sort of like a pancake batter consistency. Not too thick, but also not like liquid either. I'll give you a close-up shot so you can see what it looks like. So here's what that consistency looks like. Just like not too stiff, not too runny, just like a nice pancake batter consistency is what we're looking for. Once we have our flour and water in there, the next step is to just cover it with a towel. You want to make sure that your towel is just a nice breathable towel, and that is because when you're creating a sourdough starter, you're actually collecting and attracting yeasts that are airborne, floating around in the air, and that's what's going to come into your flour and water mixture and turn it into a sourdough starter. So you want it to be something that's loose. Even a cheesecloth would work, but loose, breathable towel that just kind of sits on there. You just want to keep the big things out, like dust, bugs, stuff like that. So we're going to put this on there, and then all you do is let it sit for 24 hours. So then what you're going to do is 24 hours from now, you're going to come back and you're going to add 1 cup of rye flour and add that, plus enough filtered or spring water to maintain that nice soupy pancake batter consistency. And then you're going to repeat that. So every day for 7 days, you add 1 more cup of rye flour and enough water to make that same consistency, mix it up, put the towel back on, and let it sit. So it's as easy as that. Every day, every 24 hours, you come back for 7 days and add those, mix it up. At the end of that 7-day period, you're going to see it get bubbly. It's going to start to expand and get bubbly. Once you start seeing that, You're getting very close. You have something that you can start baking some things with. It's probably not quite active enough to have really good success with things like loaves of bread, but you can start making things like pancakes and waffles and all of your sourdough discard type recipes after those first 7 days. What you're going to want to do once that initial 7 days are up is transfer it to a container like this. These are my favorite. This is the WEC 100 is the size here that I like to use. These are ideal for sourdough starter. This is what I keep mine in. I have a few of these so that I can wash them whenever I need to. And so keep your sourdough starter in here after that initial 7 days. The initial 7 days, it needs to be in a wide open bowl so you can attract all those yeasts from the air and really get that going. But after those 7 days, you're going to want to transfer it to something like this. It can be another similar container, but I'll link my things that I mentioned, the whisk and this, where I get the rye flour, all that kind of stuff, I'll have linked down below. And then as far as what types of flours to feed it with on an ongoing basis, that's really up to you. I prefer to keep including some whole rye flour, and then I feed mine with 1 scoop of rye flour and the rest whole spelt, but you can feed it with all-purpose flour, you can feed it with whole grain wheat flour, einkorn, whatever you want. Once it's really established and going, then you can carefully transition it to another flour a bit at a time. I wouldn't night and day switch the flour on it because that might really disrupt the microbes too much, but you can gradually transition it over to a different type of flour that you like to feed it on an ongoing basis. And again, like I said, my favorite is to keep 1 scoop of that rye flour in there and feed the rest whole spelt. I really like the benefits with that. And then when you are feeding a brand new sourdough starter, there's some specific things to know to make sure that it keeps getting robust and strong and doesn't get weak and mold. So what you need to do is have at least 2 of these types of containers, or any type of container that you're going to keep it in that's got a loose lid like this. Have 2 of them, and every time you feed it, pour about 1 inch of it into the clean jar, and then add enough flour and water to keep that nice pancake batter consistency. Let it sit for 12 hours and repeat. About 1 inch in the clean container, feed with more flour and water, and then you're going to keep doing this for several days until you see it really predictably rising and falling. And at that point, you know that you are ready to bake any kind of sourdough recipe with it. And the way to tell that a sourdough starter is ready to bake with is to have some water, like water in it could be a bowl or a pitcher or anything, fill it up partway with water, and then drizzle a little bit of sourdough starter in there. If the sourdough starter floats, that means it's ready to bake with. It's active enough and bubbly enough that you're going to have success with it. And then once you know that you have a really strong established starter, you've been feeding it pretty regularly for, a number of weeks or a month or so, then you can try feeding it once a day and see if that's enough to keep it very active. If you ever start to see your sourdough starter mold, that just means the culture is not very robust and it needs feedings twice a day for a while to get it nice and robust again. Once you do have a nice established starter, then you can do what I do, and it can live in the refrigerator most of the time, and you can bring it out once a week and bake with it, feed it. So what I'll do is I'll keep it in the fridge, bring it out, give it a feeding, so discard most of it, feed it, let it sit on the counter, get nice and bubbly. I'll feed it once or twice before I start doing my baking for the week. And then once I'm done baking with it, feed it again, put it in the fridge until I'm ready to use it next week. I know other people keep it out on the counter and they feed it once a day all the time, and they just bake with it more on an ongoing basis. So that's how you create a starter. That's how you get it nice and established and robust, and then that's how you feed it and maintain it. And then I created a beginner's sourdough guide. It's a printable guide that you can get. It's down in the description. So if you're interested, just head down there and download that. It's completely free. Also, I have other things that I've made for you down in that description box. I have some other ebooks. I also have a free from scratch cooking workshop that you might be interested in. All that's down there. But I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you found it interesting. If you did like it, I would love it if you could give this video a thumbs up, and consider subscribing if you're interested in more from scratch living and farmhouse kitchen tips. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.